decided that he wanted to become an essayist. You could make money at this. I'm not saying that Hazlitt got rich. I'm saying that he had an income, a decent income from being an essayist. So what does being an essayist actually require? What do you need to be an essayist? It's not the usual thing. You need a ink and a pen. I don't mean that kind of thing. It'll be a quill at this point anyway. Ink and a quill. What do you need?
You need arguments, you need a point to make.
That's actually important. Yes, you need to have something you want to say.
And you also need to apply the critical theories to what you want to write. It's like a formula for the mathematics. So
There's some truth to that, although I will say that the only real theory out there in the Romantic period, apart from Romanticism that is some version of this. And Belletrism is just a contraction of this French phrase. So Belletrism is saying, gosh, what a beautiful piece of poetry. Gosh, what a beautiful piece of drama. This is why it's beautiful. So that's the major aesthetic judgment that you make. Then you have the Romantic theory, because Romantic theory was popular, and that's a pretty straightforward thing to talk about. We've actually done that in 435. Is either of you in my 435 class? You are, yes. So you kind of know what Romantic theory is. Then the other thing you want to be talking about is politics. And then you want to be talking about every day, whatever you want to talk about. And that's Hazlitt. But the other piece that's missing in the discussion is you've got to have somewhere to publish this, right? You can write your brains out and say wonderful, wonderful things, but you have to have somewhere to publish it. So what's going on in the Romantic period that wasn't going on 100 years earlier?
Fast printing.
Definitely, yes. Printing was getting, it wasn't mechanized in the way that it was in the Victorian period, but it was definitely cheaper. Paper was cheaper, it wasn't handmade anymore. There were economies of scale, that is all very true. And then there had to be an audience. This old thing of people had to want to buy the periodical or the journal. So you needed an affluent, reasonably educated male, middle class, dependent upon the Industrial Revolution. And that you have. So Hazlitt could not really have existed easily a century earlier. He can exist relatively easily in the Romantic period. The reason he's famous is he's good. Simple as that. Right? You make a qualitative judgment. He stands the test of time. A lot of other essayists, they were not as good. He, in other words, found his calling. His calling was not to be a minister. It was to be writing essays about anything that came to mind. So let me give you the modern day equivalent. In order to stay in touch with British events, I read The Guardian online, which The Guardian's a left-wing, well-established, well-regarded newspaper, and it has a lot of opinion columns. And so there's an opinion column written by somebody called Marina Hyde. There's another opinion column that I read by somebody called John Crace, and they are delightful and they're very funny, and I love reading them. And they're the modern equivalent of this. The difference is the columns that I read that are opinions are 5 minutes reading, 10 minutes reading. These are much more sustained, right? If you look at the length of the piece on Coleridge, you're getting to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Looks like about 10 pages. Fairly dense pages. So sometimes I get students to say something like, Professor, why is this piece so long? As in, I don't have time for this. And the answer is the people who were reading it at that time had time for it. Because they did not have our distractions. They did not have our media. Many of them were able to live off trust funds, off money in the family because of the Industrial Revolution. So they didn't have a lot to do. They could read, they could socialize, they could have a family and look after the family. They could indulge in gambling at this time if you wanted to, and that's about it. They were not the distractions, right? So they are totally fine with spending several hours reading an essay on Coleridge. We would be okay these days with 15 minutes, maybe? So there is a genuine student difficulty these days, I think, in 2022 with dealing with material that's so long. But let me draw your attention to what I think matters. And then I'll see if there were pieces that you chose to emphasize. I'm on 667, left-hand column, middle of a page, and it's a sentence that begins hardly a speculation. So he's talking about Coleridge, and he's basically talking about his biography. And he's saying there's hardly a speculation that's been left on record from the earliest time, which is to say we don't know much about Coleridge's childhood. That's the way we put it these days. But it is loosely folded up in Mr. Coleridge's memory like a rich but somewhat tattered piece of tapestry. We might add, with more seeming than real extravagance, that scarce a thought can pass through the mind of man, but its sound has at some time or other passed over his head with rustling pinions. You're gonna love that. I mean, this is colorful writing. So he's basically saying, we don't know much about Coleridge's life, early life, but it clearly influenced him. And he thought about pretty much everything that matters in life, in intellectual life. Now, what in heck, however, is this stuff about rustling pinions passing over his head? DJ, you're not going to know this because English is not your first language. Jared, you might because it is, but it's a little obscure. What is a pinion? P-I-N-I-O-N. Rustling pinions.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Bird. The image that you want to have in your mind is a bird that is traveling just over its head and it's rustling its wings. So its feathers are rustling because it's moving its wings. And what he's saying there is he's not unacquainted with pretty much every idea. The reason he uses the bird image is because he wants to, because it's colorful. He's an essayist, right? It's sort of value added in that way. But also because he wants you to think about ideas as soaring up into the heavens, in the way that birds soar up into the heavens. That's really pretty much it.
Professor,
Yeah.
The wrestling, what's the difference between wrestling and flattering?
Oh,
Like,
okay.
is the
Yeah.
wrestling same as
Okay.
the sports?
Okay. So there's fluttering and there's rustling.
Yeah.
So this involves more movement of the wings and more movement of the feathers on the wing of a bird.
Mm-hmm.
Rustling is a less violent, less physical movement, and you know this because this applies to two things to my mind. At this time, as in the 19th century, women's skirts rustle in the 19th century, and birds' wings and their feathers rustle. So it's a sound. Rustling is actually a sound.
Okay.
It's both a movement, but it's principally a sound. Fluttering, you don't hear very much. It's more about actually seeing a movement of something.
Okay.
Was wrestling at this time also used for like things moving in the underbrush of a forest?
Yes. Not to be confused, DJ, with this word.
Sorry for
Wrestling,
that. I have so
which
many
is something
yes or
completely
questions.
different. So let's move on to. So we've read The Ancient Mariner, which I think is cool. On 671, you get to look at Hazlitt's view of the Ancient Mariner. And we get this statement. Of all, notice it's of all, it's not just some. Of all Mr. Coleridge's productions, by productions he means what he's written, The Ancient Mariner is the only one that we could with confidence put into any person's hands on which we wished to impress a favorable idea of his extraordinary powers. He's saying something a little complicated here, and this is one of the reasons why Hazlitt is good. He's saying Coleridge is a very complicated thinker. He's written a lot. He's written a lot of poetry. By this time, he'd also written a lot of spiritual writing, reflective writing, about what the purpose of life is and how you should behave as an intellectual. Biographia Literaria, his biography is a good example of the kind of somewhat difficult, complicated writing that he engaged in. So he's saying, okay, Coleridge is difficult, but everybody loves the Ancient Mariner. Everybody can get a sense of the power of Coleridge through the Ancient Mariner. So then you as modern day readers can respond, well, actually, William Hazlitt, I didn't get all of the Ancient Mariner. I found it difficult, whatever you want to say. You don't have to agree with what Hazlitt says. Hazlitt says that the Ancient Mariner is straightforward, is easy to understand. I actually agree, but you don't have to. It's not a requirement in any way that you agree with what Hazlitt says. Anybody could read it, anybody could understand it, that's his argument. Okay, let me move on to the very end of the essay on Coleridge. He gets into the question of what went wrong between the late poets and Coleridge. In other words, why essentially did Coleridge and Wordsworth split as friends? They were not friends after about 1815, give or take. And the answer is, Mr. Coleridge did not enter with them, pitching his tent upon the barren waste without and having no abiding place nor city of refuge. To understand that, you have to understand the immediate material before it. But what he's basically saying is Coleridge did not get engaged in the arguments about poetry that arose from lyrical ballads, the reception of lyrical ballads. He did not get involved in the kinds of struggles that Wordsworth had to have romantic poetry accepted. So he was isolated. He refers to him as having no abiding place nor city of refuge. That's a biblical reference, basically. So that's Coleridge. He's difficult. He doesn't entirely engage in the discussions of the time, particularly about poetry. He has one accessible poem, Ancient Mariner. He pretty much said something about everything that was of interest to intellectuals in the first quarter of the 19th century. That's Coleridge. He dovetails the discussion of Coleridge with Wordsworth, as you would expect, right? He's a little different on Wordsworth. He's very interesting when he says his first line on 674 gets at a point that you might very much take on board and consider. Mr. Wordsworth's genius is a pure emanation of the spirit of the age. And the spirit of the age in German is, and he's using this phrase, spirit of the age, deliberately. Zeitgeist is a, spirit of the age is a direct translation of zeitgeist, because Zeit is age and Geist is ghost. So it's age ghost, or spirit of the age. And he's saying, interestingly, had he lived in any other period of the world, he would never have been heard of. This is an insult. It's a minor insult, but it's an insult. He is essentially saying, look, Wordsworth's poetry is great. If it had not been written during the Romantic period, so there's other great Romantic poets, Coleridge and Keats and Shelley and Byron and Hemans and all the rest, then he would not have been heard of. He's heard of because there's all these other poets. If there had not been Romanticism as a movement, he wouldn't have been considered good enough. I think that's unkind, but that's what he argues. Then we get towards the end on 680. This is said by many critics, and I think it's fair. I actually obviously love Wordsworth's poetry. As a man, he had a couple of problems, and I should sort of address those. One is he got a little bit too fond of his fame. He would deny this. He denied it at the time. If you're around now, he'd deny it. he would say, no, that's not true. But he clearly enjoyed the adulation of people who would come up by train. Train was a very recent invention at this time, railway, very recent invention. They would come up to the Lake District simply to see him. So they then walk to the Lake District, they'd walk to wherever he's living, right? And they would come in and they'd meet him. And they'd want his signature. They'd want his autograph. That went to his head. It's also the case that he became a little pompous and a little defensive about his writing. You can sort of see this a little bit in the preface, even in 1800. He's essentially saying some version of, this is what a poet should be, and oh, by the way, it's me, right? That's a little unkind to him, but you know what I mean. And so on 680, we have Hazlitt saying this: we exaggerate our own merits when they are denied by others, and are apt to grudge and cavil at every particle of praise bestowed on those to whom we feel a conscious superiority. Bottom of the left-hand column on 680, so it's actually the middle of the final paragraph of the judgment about the essay about Wordsworth. I'll just repeat it because I know it's sometimes tough to find particular isolated quotes. We exaggerate our own merits when they are denied by others, and are apt to grudge and cavil at every particle of praise bestowed on those to whom we feel a conscious superiority. So here we have Wordsworth. What he's saying is this: Wordsworth knows he's a great poet. Some people are saying he's not. That's the first part of the sentence. What that then leads to, in as far as Hazlitt is concerned, is Wordsworth became envious of any praise that was given to other poets who were not as good as he was. The version of this, I would say, is he's really concerned with his public image again. And he's not prepared to accept that he's capable of writing bad poetry. He's not able to accept that there are poets who are as good as he is, that Keats is as good as he is, or Shelley as good as he is, for example. And that's a character flaw. So what I love about this essay, and what I love about Hazlitt in general, and I've got a collection of Hazlitt's essays, and they're like a fairly substantial book, is he doesn't let anybody get away with stuff. So Coleridge is famous, Wordsworth's famous, doesn't mean you can't take him down. But he's not mean. He's just, in his opinion, accurate. So now imagine let's see what the date of this is, 1825. So in 1825, this was published. So sitting there in 1825, and you're well educated, and you're a man, and you have lots of leisure, and you're reading this. That then makes you want to go back to Wordsworth and back to Coleridge and see if you actually agree with what Hazlitt says. So as an essayist, he's really good because he makes you want to reread what he's talking about. And that's a gift, I think, rather than, okay, I read that and now I'm going to move on. I can see somebody reading about Coleridge, reading about Wordsworth and going, okay, I'm going to check whether or not I agree with this opinion. So they go ahead and they read the poems again. Anything on that? Because I know I forgot actually, we ran out of time to talk about it and I didn't want to just ignore Hazlitt, because it is an essayist. Finally we're out of poetry, right, for a bit. And that's kind of nice in some ways, perhaps. It's not all about poetry and romantics. So anything else on Hazlitt?
It's very interesting seeing like the characterization of the poet outside of Wordsworth.
Isn't it interesting? By a contemporary. So this is not you and I writing long after they die some historical judgment on these people. These are people that Hazlitt knew, that he socialized with, and he was as honest, I think, as he could be about their strengths and their weaknesses. And he's saying they're both great writers, that's clear. He's saying, I think, that Coleridge had the better mind, and that Wordsworth is the better poet. He's saying that Coleridge probably should have taken part in intellectual battles in a way that he didn't. Wordsworth should have been less vain and less concerned with his reputation. All of that's probably true. And so it's a really nice judgment. It's not a takedown. It's not mean. It's just well written and honest. Is the way I put it. Let us move on to Eve of St. Agnes but I want to do something a little different. So can either of you tell me what the name of the love object, Madeline's love object, is in the Eve of St. Agnes? So that's the poem you read for the day. So the woman is called Madeline. What is her love object?
Well, the man was called Porphyro?
Porphyro, yes, Porphyro. So this, I will tell you this because it's not well remembered these days, because we tend to, I know Taylor loves Keats's odes, so it's like, okay, he wrote all these great odes, right? He was actually better known for the Eve of St. Agnes. The Eve of St. Agnes was a more popular poem, because it's a great Gothic poem. It's beautifully, beautifully written. And it's important that you know that the love object is Porphyro, because a generation later, the great English poet Robert Browning, the husband of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, also a great Victorian poet, he, Robert Browning, wrote a poem called Porphyria's Lover. And he's deliberately imitating some aspects of the Eve of St. Agnes. So if you think about what the Eve of St. Agnes is all about, the Eve of St. Agnes is all about a woman who dreams about her lover, and the lover then actually physically turns up, and they run away together. That's the short and long and short of the story. It's pretty straightforward. It's actually really enjoyable. But then, Browning always had a slightly macabre element in his poetry. And so he writes a poem called Porphyria's Lover. So now it's Porphyria, the woman. And the woman Porphyria, named after Porphyro in Eve of St. Agnes, she has a lover, and this is what happens. And I'm going to go ahead and shut off some of the lights so that you can read it more easily.
Just out of curiosity, are there any connections with Porphyros?
I don't know.
Okay, that was the first thing that popped into my head when I saw the name.
That's an interesting point. I actually don't know. I'm actually probably going to see. Let me see, because this is not going to be easy to get it to be a decent size so you can see it. Let me just go ahead and cut and paste in Word so I can actually do this more easily. It's not going to be as easy as I thought. Make sure we can actually get across to that. Okay. So you can read that, right? That's nice and straightforward. Okay. So this is Browning saying, okay, you thought Keats's poem, The Eve of St. Agnes, was Gothic. This is super Gothic. The rain set early in tonight. The sun and wind was soon awake. It tore the elm tops down for spite, and did its worst to vex the lake. I listened with heart fit to break, when glided in Porphyria. Straight she shut the cold out and the storm, and kneeled, and made the cheerless grate blaze up, and all the cottage warm. Which done, she rose, and from her form withdrew the dripping cloak and shawl, and laid her soiled gloves by, untied her hat, and let the damp hair fall. And last, she sat down by my side and called me. Okay, what's going on there? Just approximately so far.
It's a stormy night,
Okay.
and he's just, I guess, sitting at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, and Porphyria comes in the cottage. The man's already in the cottage. Porphyria comes into the cottage, starts to take off her outside garments, her coat and stuff like that. And then that's all we have so far. Pretty mundane, right?
She starts a fire, and
Yes. Yeah. Starts the fire, so it's going to get nice and warm. So we get it to, and called me. When no voice replied, she put my arm around her waist and made her smooth white shoulder bare and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping, made my cheek lie there and spread all her yellow hair, murmuring how she loved me, she, too weak for all her heart's endeavor to set its struggling passion free from pride and vainer ties to sever, and give herself to me forever. Thoughts on that so far? Any particular focuses that the poem seems to have, especially from the speaker's point of view? We don't know who the I is. We assume it's a man because there's eroticism here, right?
Mm-hmm.
He likes her body, he likes the shape of her body, likes her hairline, it seems like.
At this point, I'm starting to question whether the speaker is like a ghost or something.
Okay, good. That's actually
He
good
just-
speculation.
He just exists.
Yes.
And has not done a single
Yes.
thing yet.
That is actually a very important point to make, and I really appreciate that, because it's hard for me to remember, because I've read all these poems so often, that there was a time when I would read a poem and I wouldn't know what's going to happen. So I start to make these judgments about, oh, okay, it's going in this direction, and this is what the narrative's about, and this is what seems to be the preoccupation. And then line by line, you start to change your point of view. So it's a lived learning experience over time when you read a poem for the first time. She doesn't seem to be prepared to give herself to me forever. That's an interesting one. Okay. But passion sometimes would prevail, nor could tonight's gay feast restrain a sudden thought of one so pale for love of her, and all in vain. He loves her, she doesn't seem to return the affection. So she was come through wind and rain. Be sure I looked up at her eyes, happy and proud. At last I knew Porphyria worshipped me. Surprise made my heart swell, and still it grew, while I debated what to do. For suddenly he's overjoyed. He was afraid that she didn't love him enough, but now she seems to love him because she's got that love look in her eyes, right, from his point of view. Okay. Well, I debated what to do. A little bit of an odd line there, I think, while I debated what to do. That moment she was mine, fair, perfectly pure and good. I found a thing to do. And all her hair in one long yellow string, I wound 3 times a little thread around and strangled her. No pain felt she, and I am quite sure she felt no pain. As a shut bud that holds a bee, I warily oped her lids. Again laughed the blue eyes without a stain, and I untightened next the tress about her neck. Her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss. I propped her head up as before, only this time my shoulder bore her head. It droops upon it still, the smiling rosy little head, so glad it has its utmost will, that all its scorn at once is fled, and I its love and gained instead. Porphyria's love, she guessed not how her darling one wish would be heard. And thus we sit together now, and all night long we have not stirred, and yet God has not said a word. Wow. He got into trouble for this poem, as you can imagine.
Not surprised.
Yeah, this is a pretty extreme poem. He loves her. She now apparently loves him. So he decides to kill her with what he loves most, which is her long yellow hair, which is tied behind her. So he does that 3 times around, kills her, and then they simply sit together, and he's satisfied because she dies painlessly, he thinks, which of course is not true, dies at the moment when she's most beautiful. So he possesses her forever at that moment. Creepy, right? I just want to point out to you, this is not the Romantics. This is Robert Browning. This is 1850, 1860, something like that. I'll put his name up because I don't want you to see it in the news. He's actually Robert Browning, of the Victorian poet. He's best known for what are called dramatic monologues. And just so you don't think all he ever wrote was creepy poems, I don't want you to get that. I encourage you to read a poem that is a beautiful dramatic monologue. It's called Andrea del Sarto, and it's a poem about a Renaissance painter called Andrea del Sarto, who was thought as good as Raphael. And it's a poem from Andrea del Sarto's point of view. And what he points out is that the reason that he's not the greatest painter is that he's in love with a woman who is distracting him from being a great painter. But this time it's not about murder. There's a beautiful line, though, in which clearly his mistress, the woman he's in love with, has no interest in him as a painter. How do we know that? Because she walks past one of his portraits as he's painting it, and her clothes brush the paint. So it's kind of like, I don't give a rip. It's just a beautiful detail. That is a wonderful poem. And he wrote dramatic monologues because he was criticized when he was younger for writing poems that expressed difficult ideas. And so he said, okay, I'm fed up with being criticized. I'm not going to write from the point of view of other characters. So he wrote these dramatic monologues. So if people criticized them, he didn't feel like they were criticizing himself. They were just criticizing the character. Poets are really, really sensitive in that way, I think. So that was just by way of giving you something a bit different. I think I can probably save the line at this point. So let's talk about ESA a little bit, Ebus and Agnes. We need to start out with that one phrase I put on the board underneath the abbreviated title. Okay. So Spenserian, right, with an S. That's the adjective part, right? That's as simple as that. DJ, from a linguistic point of view, as ESL, that IAN just means it's an adjective, right? So you know that the noun is Spencer. So Spencer was a person. Anybody know who Spencer was?
Not much other than being a poet.
He was a poet, yeah, Edmund Spencer. Always remember it's an S, not a C. So he was a near contemporary of Shakespeare. And he's famous for a couple of poems. He wrote a lot of stuff, but he's famous for a poem called The Shepherd's Calendar, which is interesting, but not as great as the epic that he wrote. So Edmund Spencer writes an epic. This is pre-Milton. So Spencer is trying to be greater than Chaucer, because Chaucer's the great poet before Spencer shows up. So Spencer's going to be the great poet, and he writes an epic. And the epic is called The Faerie Queene. This word fairy is just the old-fashioned spelling. I have no idea what that is. Okay. The Faerie Queene. And it's a long poem. It's got 7 books. He meant to write 14. He ended up with almost seven books. So this is the epic. And if you think about it, we've sort of been through this before. Think about Wordsworth and his vanity. Spencer wants to write something that will be remembered. It's going to be remembered for 2 reasons, in his opinion. One of them is it's a great poem, right? It's a great epic about English life. He also invents a stanza for it. And a stanza, remember, is just a group of lines. Hence that. So Keats comes along and he goes, well, I'm writing the equivalent of an epic. It's an epic about Madeline and Porphyro and the desire to be alone together, to fulfill their love. And so that's what they do. And they rush off into the storm. End of a sort of pseudo-epic poem. It's really a ballad by Keats. And he goes, well, I know, why don't I use Spencer's stanza? because poets like a challenge. Now we need to look at actually what the poem stanzas look like from the point of view of rhyme scheme. So I'm just going to give you a moment, and let's look actually at the second stanza, which begins on 1094, because you've got a whole stanza there, so you can more easily figure out what the rhyme scheme is, and if there's anything else interesting about the Spenserian stanza. But we'll start out with rhyme scheme. And remember, when you do a rhyme scheme, you start with the first line, you call it A. If the second line doesn't rhyme with it, you call it B. If the next line doesn't rhyme with it, you call it C. If it rhymes with the second one, you call it B. If it rhymes with the first one, you call it A. It's just that alphabetical sequence. So let's go through it. The first line, line 10, is man, so we call that A. Knees doesn't rhyme with it, right? No rhyme between knees and man, so that's B. The next, this is going to trick you a little bit, DJ. This doesn't rhyme, but it looks like it does. So the word is wan, W-A-N. It looks like we should pronounce it wan to rhyme with man, but we don't in English, it's just wan. So it looks like it rhymes. It's what we actually call, technically, this. It's an I rhyme. So it looks like it should rhyme, but it doesn't. It's a bit of cheating.
I like that.
I love them too. Yeah, I, as a poet, I've done that too. And I kind of chuckle when I do it. It's like, yeah, these two rhyme, don't they? No, they don't. But it's okay. So it goes A. And what about degrees? Well, degrees it does rhyme with knees, so it's B. Then we go to the next 4 lines. Freeze, degrees, so that's B again. Rails, nope, so that's C. Oratories, freeze, yep, that's B. Fails, that rhymes with rails, so that's C. Males, the last one rhymes with fails, therefore it's C. So now we know the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, B, C, B, C, C. That is most of what is famous as the Spenserian stanza. And it's quite difficult to write. But there's one other nice little piece to it. Yes?
It's 8 lines of iambic pentameter
Yep.
and 1 of iambic hexameter.
Yeah, I think it is hexameter. Yes. So in simple language, DJ, we have 8 lines of 10 syllables, and the 9th line is 12.
Okay.
And if you look at it, every single freaking stanza is that way. This is not casual. This is Keats going, okay, I've got the 10 count, oh yeah, this last one's 12 count.
Out of curiosity,
Yes.
the stanzas being numbered, is that something that Keats did himself, or is that just put in later for organizations?
I've seen 2 versions, and one version has no stanza numbers, and the other version has stanza numbers. I think it's actually Keats, is my guess. And I think the reason for it is he wants to make clear that this is a narrative, and you're going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. There's a progression all the way through to, what is it, 42? Isn't that right? I think it's 42. I could be way off on that.
Yep.
So we can all the way to, yeah, 42, that's right. 1099, it ends on 42 with 42 stanzas. Jared, you raised something interesting, and let me talk about this a little bit. I've talked about this in class in other relations, but this is a little different. So I've made the complaint as a teacher that in the old days, everybody had the same book. First of all, because everybody could kind of afford to buy the books, which is not always the case of email. And then there were just not that many versions of published that students could get. These days you get ebooks, and you get it on the phone, you get it on your tablet, and you look it online, and you've got it in book form, right? So the problem becomes, how much difference is there between the versions that students are looking at and I'm looking at? It's a minor teaching problem. Not a big deal, but it's a minor problem. That is disguising the fact that in Keats's time, there were lots of versions of the poem. And I'll explain what I mean by that, particularly in relation to Aeolus and Dagnes. The minor changes would be that Keats himself may have chosen during his short lifetime to revise the poem. So which one do you publish, right? You publish the earlier version or the later version. And there's theories about that I won't go into, which are satisfactory from my point of view at least. So that's one thing to consider in general terms. And then later on, it might be that people publish the poem and they change stuff. Particularly, they might change some of the spelling. If the spelling is antiquated, it's old-fashioned, we're going to make it modern. We're going to what's called regularize it or standardize it. You can do that. So the text changes again, right? The way in which Ebers and Dagens changed it, which is interesting, is that there are actually two versions of it. The version we have here is the less erotic one. It's pretty obvious that Keats had a pretty decent libido. It's pretty obvious that he was sexually deeply attracted to Fanny Brawne. Bright Star shows that. It's a beautiful poem of sexual desire. So his first version was too sexualized for the editor who wanted to publish his work. So he says to Keats, you know, this is a bit risque. You've got to tone it down. So he tones it down. So there are two different versions of Ebers and Dagens. One is the original, which is more sexual and erotic, and the later one, which is toned down. The later version of this, and this is not about Keats, this is about Shakespeare, but just pointing out how wrong it is to mess with what an artist wants to do. There are these. Anybody heard of the Bowdlers? Yeah. So there's an adjective. In this country, we spell it that way. If you Bowdlerize something, you take out the stuff that you consider to be smutty. So they look at Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, I don't know how well you know Shakespeare, but Shakespeare's got some pretty raunchy stuff. I mean, he likes his sexual jokes, loves sexual jokes, because he knows his audience is going to love sexual jokes. Whole lot of sexual jokes in Shakespeare. Well, the Bowdlers come along, one of them's a reverend, and he goes, no, we can't have this. So he has the effrontery to take somebody who's been Shakespeare and do an edition in which all the smutty stuff has come out. So he cuts stuff out, he changes words, whatever you want to do. And the term Bowdlerize has now come into our language as taking something and taming it, taking out the stuff that's smutty. Just interesting. There's a word for everything. Is that fairly clear, DJ? Okay. Don't worry about it. Did you kind of got it right, Jared?
Yeah.
I don't really understand, like, what's take something.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll cut it out. Erase it.
Erase it.
Erase it, yeah. So you erase the smutty stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And you leave it out, or you change the language.
Oh.
And the Bowdlers, who are brothers, decided they would do that with Shakespeare. Because I deeply love Shakespeare, I think he's a great writer and poet. I'm deeply offended at that. I love the fact that Shakespeare likes smutty jokes. I mean, he's figured out his audience enjoys them. He's not going to give them stuff they don't like.
Yeah.
He's going to give them what they like. That's why it's so popular.
Yeah, it's like in China. In China we got a more and more strict policy against some like sexual desire jokes.
Yes.
But those
Yes.
sexual desire jokes can attract more audience.
They totally can.
Yeah.
And it's denying a certain aspect of human behavior.
Yeah.
You know, sexual attraction and crude humor is something that most humans like. You know, some more than others and blah, blah, blah. There are asexual people, there are people who are offended by sexual jokes, but not that many, I don't think. Not at least in English culture, I know that much. Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, how smutty the original version is? Because personally, this one, like, even today, there were a couple things that I was, like, raising my eyebrows at, and I was...
Well, I'm beginning to wonder, is this a smutty version? Is this the erotic version? I have to check, I assume it's not.
I didn't think it was that.
Yeah.
I didn't think so, but most of the stuff I was raising eyebrows at was like, that's questionably more in the picture. And just kind of things of like, I more of like a distaste for the general situation at like a personal level.
Yeah, that's interesting. So tell me what you find troubling about the poem.
I mean, the whole situation is inherently voyeuristic and
Yes.
just non-consensual.
Yes, yeah, that is beautifully put. Yeah, Voyeuristic, and I think that term probably is not known to you, DJ, because it's not that easy. Voyeuristic and non-consensual.
It just seems so convenient that she happens to be dreaming of him specifically. Like,
Yes.
man, if it was anybody else,
Yes.
this would be a very different poem.
Yes. So here's what's going on. I mean, I totally agree with you. Don't get me wrong. I think it's right to be offended because you wouldn't want, if you're a woman, you wouldn't want this to happen. As the man, I assume would not be entirely happy at the voyeuristic elements in this.
Unless it's the love of your life. I mean,
Unless it's the love of your life. So voyeuristic, DJ, means you're in a situation where you're looking at somebody and they're not aware you're looking at them. And it's usually in a situation where they're doing something, they might be undressing or they might be naked, and so voyeuristically, and what it comes from is that French word voyeur, which just literally means somebody who looks. And because English is so clever at this, it takes this from French and then changes what the actual meaning is. Because in French it's just somebody who looks, I believe. And now it's become in English somebody who looks when it's not appropriate to look.
Okay.
Because remember, Porfario's there, and she's undressing, and she gets into bed. This is a common theme, though, and I have to tell you that Shakespeare again wrote a play called Cymbeline that nobody ever reads, but it's an incredibly good play. But it has a voyeuristic element, kind of exactly like Even St. Agnes in it.
It's still super, super common in like Hollywood movies.
Yeah, it is, and I'm offended at that because turning the roles around, I wouldn't want that to happen. And thinking about my girlfriend, I wouldn't want my girlfriend to be in that situation because it's non-consensual and it's coercive. In some ways, it's definitely coercive. It's not appropriate behavior. What's interesting, right, is that he writes this poem, and that's not what gets criticized. Not the voyeuristic piece. It's more like we shouldn't be spending so much time on our physicality. But that's a slightly different argument. And I'm not actually so much offended at the physicality of it particularly, but yes, the situation with voyeur. Okay. Let's look just maybe at the beginning part of it. Because this is an easy story. This is a straightforward story, right? And Keats gussies it up. He makes it more complicated. This is really simply a story about two lovers, and they want to, they get to escape off into the darkness and never seen again. But he sets the scene at great length, and he includes two people that are interesting, that are quote unquote unnecessary. And I want to make sure I actually get this spelled right. So one of the characters, I think he's not named, is called a beadsman. What is a beadsman?
I assumed it was prayer beads.
Yes.
Jesus prays.
Yes. So there's a Catholic prayer beads.
So I was thinking it's like a member of the clergy.
Yes. And he gets paid to do what? And this happened up until, we don't quite know when this happens in terms of the date of the action of the story in Rome. But in Roman Catholicism, people were paid to pray for the souls of the dead. And that's what a beadsman does. Catholics at that time, the medieval period, were so concerned with getting to heaven that they felt that they wanted to increase their chances of getting to heaven by paying a professional to pray to God for them after they're dead. And that's the beadsman. And the beads are the rosary. That's the word I was looking for. Because I'm not a Catholic, I sort of forget the bits of this. So the beadsman has a rosary, and he does the Ave Marias and all the Hail Marys and this kind of stuff to get the person to heaven. That's one character. Who's the other character? In this case, it's a named character.
I remember she was a maid, but very, very old.
Yes. So it's sort of like a governess, like a nanny almost. So she's somebody responsible for looking after Madeline, for looking after the household. So those two are talked about. A lot of time is spent at the beginning about the season and the weather, because he wants to set the scene. He's enjoying setting the scene. And then let's look at the end stanza, because it's just interesting how quickly everything is sort of erased in the narrative. It's a one stanza ending with no duration to it. It's sort of like Porphyria's lover. The speed with which you go from Porphyria's lover thinking, oh, it's great, she loves me, to, oh, I'm strangling her. It's like 3 lines. It's really quick. There's an interesting kind of pace here that goes on. So this is stanza 42. And they are gone. Ages long ago, these lovers fled away into the storm. That night the Baron dreamt of many a woe, and all his warrior guests, with shade and form of witch and demon and large coughing worm, were long benightmared. Angela, the old, died palsy-twitched, with meagre face to form. The beadsman, after 1,000 aves told, for I unsought for, slept among his ashes cold. Okay, so let's look at this and see what he's actually saying. This is an anti-religious poem. This is not one that is in favor of organized religion at all. So he started with the lovers. He deliberately doesn't say when this happens. This is not 1300, it's not 1400, it's some mythical past. And so they're gone. I just is intensive, yes. And they're gone, yes. Ages long ago, these lovers fled away into the storm. We don't know what happens to the lovers. We assume they lived a happy life. There could be Aevis Antagonist Part 2, by the way, you can write a poem in which you find out what happens to these lovers, Madeline and Porphyria, but you've got to write that because it's not been written by Keats. That night the Baron dreamt of many a woe. So here's the nightmare aspect of it. He dreamt of many a woe, so he has nightmares. All his warrior guests were dreaming of shade and form of witch. So they dreamt of witches and demons and large coffin worm. Ouch. This isn't just a coffin worm, right? If you're buried in a coffin, worms will eat you. Literal worms. That's why I'm definitely getting cremated. That thing grosses me out. But these are large coffin worms. What I love about this is Keats is sort of saying, I've studied this, and this is a long coffin worm. Of course he hasn't studied it, he's just imagining these are really grotesque coffin worms. But it's a nightmare, okay? And then, to continue the theme of death, Angela the Old, that's all we know about her, she's just old, died palsy-twitched with meagre face deformed. I don't remember in the poem, and I don't think her face is described as deformed in the poem. So I think this is something that happens in the consequence of death. So palsy-twitched, she dies essentially of a stroke, is what we would say these days. Palsy-twitched, and the stroke deforms her face, and she's dead. She's got a meager face anyway. She's really unattractive. That's what meager means there. And then we turn to the beadsman. What's happened to the beadsman? The beadsman, after 1,000 aves told, so he's done thousands of these aves, thousands of rosary chants, for I unsought for, but nobody's been asking for them. But he does them anyway, because that's what he does. Died among his ashes cold. I don't know how to interpret this, and Keats is deliberately vague. There's two possibilities here. Slept among his ashes cold. He's either got a fire, and he's sleeping, and the fire has died down, or his ashes cold for himself, and the sleeping is he's dead. He's dead and his body is rotting. He is the ashes. I think, personally, it's more about the fire having gone out and he's fallen asleep. There's the implication that he's dying. So,
I
yeah,
thought
please.
that he had died.
Good.
The initial part, sorry, at the beginning of the poem, we talked about the beadsman. From there to the part where it went into the house, when I first read it, I was like, how how the world is connected.
Yes.
It's like going from the beadsman to the rest of the poem was a jump for me that I didn't get the first time through.
Yeah.
And so then I read it at the end and I was like, so it's like just another symbolism of death.
Yes, I agree with that. So here's Keats, the great poet, right? He's done his odes. He's doing his odes, and he doesn't want to do just odes because he's a great poet. He knows he's running out of time. So he goes, well, I want to do something different. So he thinks, I'm going to tell this really gruesome, not gruesome story, this really intense story. And then he's going, well, how am I going to tell it? So he says to himself, I'm going to tell it in narrative form. It's not going to be an ode, it's not going to be a short poem, it's not going to be a sonnet. I'm going to tell a story. And so then he makes the story complicated in ways that he likes. He can make it super simple, shorter. The woman loves the man manages to get in and see her. Turns out that doesn't totally offend her, they run off into the storm. That's a short version. But the Beedman and Angela really do a great job of complicating the narrative. And I agree with you, Jared, the move from the Beedman and Angela to the central story is interesting. It's not entirely easy to follow because Keats wants to challenge himself and wants to challenge you. And then he goes, okay, how am I going to construct this? Because he's got the idea in his head. And the answer again is the Spenserian stanza. He goes, well, I'm going to show an affection for, a respect for one of the great English poets, which is Edmund Spenser. Let us move on to the other poem, which is a different kind of poem. It is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14. Yeah, I thought there was a sonnet. It is at least 14 lines. Okay. So let's go back to one of the central and most, I'm trying to think of the best word for this. So, prolific. I was thinking, what I really admire about Keats is that he deeply loved Fanny Brawne. And there's no unalloyed affection. I mean, she was just super, super important to him. And it's true, if he lived, what would have happened if they got married? Would they have stayed together? Blah, blah, blah. But I kind of just like Keats in one way because he's really honest about the depth of his affection. And that affection is physical as well. Even though obviously physically he was probably not able to consummate the relationship. Nonetheless, I like it that he's not idealizing her in the sense of denying her physicality. It's the whole package. Yeah, he loves her physically, he loves her mind, and so on. And this is a tribute sonnet to her, and it's called Bright Star, right? So in a way, she becomes that which allows him to navigate his way through the world. That's what Bright Star does. At a time when he did not have GPS, back in 1820. That was 200 years later, okay. So let me just read it out. And again, this is potentially a sonnet, if it's 14 lines long. We'll have to figure out actually what it is. Bright star, would I were steadfast as thou art, not in lone splendor hung aloft the night and watching with eternal lids apart, like nature's patient, sleepless eremite, the moving waters at their priest-like task of pure ablution round earth's human shores, or gazing on the new, soft, fallen mask of snow upon the mountains and the moors. No, yet still steadfast, still unchangeable, pillowed upon my fair love's brightening breast, to feel forever its soft fall and swell, awake forever in a sweet unrest, still to hear her tender taken breath, and so live ever, or else swoon to death. Wow. Okay. I think that's very beautiful, but there are two pieces to it, right? So this looks like it would be let's do the rhyme scheme thing again, because we need to see what kind of sonnet it is. So we go A is art, And I just want to make sure, part, task, mask. Okay, so we've got A, a part, B. Actually, B is night. So A is a part, so it's A, B, A. Eremite, night, yes, B. Task, nope. So we're C. A, B, A, A, B, A, B. C, shores, D. Mask, C. Moors, D. Unchangeable, E. Breast is F. Swell doesn't rhyme with anything either, does it? I don't think so. So that's G. And then unrest, breast, so that's F. And then breath, and then death, rhyme. So I've got it, and tell me if I'm wrong. I've got it as A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, F, G. It would be H, H, wouldn't it? H, H. Okay. This is closest to a Shakespearean sonnet. The Shakespearean sonnet is A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. So it taps out of G, this taps out of H. The problem is that swell does not rhyme with anything else. Otherwise, it would go ahead and be the F, E, F, G, G. So G is the problem one. So let's talk about, so this is what's called an irregular sonnet. That's how we label it. For the sake of labeling something, that's what it is. It's almost Shakespearean, but it's not quite. So the irony or the perhaps unexpected importance of that G line is it stands out. Remember that we're supposed to listen to poems, frankly, more than we're supposed to read them out. So when you get to feel forever itself, fall and swell, then we notice that that does not rhyme with anything. I'm not in a big way, but I'm just saying subconsciously we do. So then the question is, he's got a rhyme with unchangeable. Right, that's the rhyme one, unchangeable. That's what makes it difficult. So he is actually deliberately coming up with a word unchangeable that he's not going to find a rhyme for because he wants that unrhymed line to matter. So why does it matter? To feel forever its soft, full, and swell. And the answer is the physicality of it. He's emphasizing his enjoyment of having his head resting on his beloved's, I would assume, not necessarily naked, I don't think that's necessarily clear. Anyway, her breasts. That's a very 2022 thing, seems to me. And I love him for that because he could have come up with something different for unchangeable. We can look back and no, yet still steadfast, still. I would actually love, in your journal, if you can do this, this is a cool journal assignment, if you want to do this. Try to figure out a way to make the same meaning in line E and line G, but make them rhyme, right? So you've got to change the word unchangeable, is my guess, and try to make it rhyme with swell, because that's a single syllable line. A single syllable word, excuse me. I know we'll work on it a little bit. You still got to get your 10 count. You still got to get your 10 syllable count on line 6, 7, 8, 9, on line 9. Gosh, that's an interesting challenge. I'll do what I can for that. If you want to do it, you can. So let's talk about the other piece to this sonnet, which is that it looks like pretty much it's a 4, 4, 4, 2. Right, that's 14. This is for once we get into mathematics almost. The irony, though, is that if you look at the poem, it's splitting 8-6. And you can see that because he goes on all about the star, and then he goes on the beginning of line 9, none. And that's the turn. And the turn with the line here is what's called the volt or volta. And this is an Italian sonnet form. The Italian sonnets by Petrarch and Dante and the rest, they split 8/6. The English sonnet of Shakespeare is 4/4/4/2. So the rhyme scheme in this sonnet is English, 4/4/4/2. The structure of it is Italian, 8/6. So, frankly, among other things, Keats is showing off. Love him for that. He's saying, I'm going to get the rhyme scheme of an English sonnet, and I'm going to break it like an Italian sonnet. And oh, by the way, I'm going to deliberately make it impossible for me to rhyme with swell and unchangeable. So he emphasizes, not unchangeable, because you don't know unchangeable is not going to rhyme. You emphasize the swell line. I will say that the first time, I still remember this, when I first read this poem, this was back at university, so I was 18, 19. I remember it the first time, I remember thinking, boy, that's a stupid rhyming word, unchangeable. What's he doing that for? And sure enough, he doesn't rhyme it. I still remember that feeling. It's like, yeah, great move. Loved him for it. Because the problem is, in English, this sounds really weird. In English, we don't have a lot of words that rhyme. We just don't. It's a quote-unquote fact. You can demonstrate it linguistically. By contrast, the Italians, most obviously, everything in Italian rhymes with everything else. It is truly scary. It's not absolutely true, but you can see that it's somewhat true, because Dante wrote an epic that has the tightest imaginable rhyme scheme in it, and he gets away with it because it's Italian. It's called Terza Rima, and I won't go into it because it's outside of the focus of the class, but that's what Dante does in his whole epic, and it's a really tight rhyme scheme in Italian. Can't do it in English. Every language has different qualities, and English is beautiful, I think, and very flexible. But for some reason, rhyming is a pain. So, what's the answer? The answer is, if you're going to rhyme in English, you've got to have one-syllable words. The moment you go to 2 or to 3, you're in trouble. So look at what we've got. Breast, swell, unrest, yeah, that's 2 syllables. Breath, death, 1 syllable. Moors, 1 syllable. Mask, shores, task, apart, night, art. All of those are single. Eremite is not. But eremite does rhyme with night. So that's good. Eremite is 3 syllables, but he manages to get the rhyme. It's interesting to notice, if you ever want to write a sonnet, I'll tell you how to do it in the time that remains. So you've got 14 lines. Go with the rhyme, go with the end rhyme first. Don't mess with it. You've got a story you want to tell, you get the rhyme scheme done, and then you fix it so that the lines make sense with the end rhyme. That's how to do it. If you try and do it any other way, you will metaphorically take it out. And I know that because I've done a lot of sonnets over my life, and that seems to be the only easy way to do it. There's no shortcuts to being easy. Okay. In the time that remains, let's just talk briefly about what he's talking about in the first 8 lines. Because he starts out with a bright star, right? And then suddenly he's on to his lover's breast and wanting to rest his head on her breast and stuff like that. So, what's his problem with the bright star? Why didn't he just want to be a bright star for the whole of the poem? This is a really interesting poem in that way. The more I look at it, the more I sort of love Keats for this.
And there makes a comparison that they're both like unchanging.
Beautiful, steadfast, yeah.
But it's the second half, but unchanging is in a different way because he's talking about like breath going in and out, and like the gentle movement of life. Whereas like he's talking about a star, and like he could have characterized it as like twinkling, but he doesn't. He characterizes it as steadfast and like a lone splendor.
Lone splendor, yes.
And then eternal. So it's like very unchanging.
Yes. It's very unchanging. It's also very alone. So he has the advantage that he is steadfast to his beloved, Fanny Brawne, but he's not alone. He's with her in a very physical sense, right, which he enjoys. So he says, no, I don't want to be like that star. I don't want to be alone. I just want to be steadfast like that star. And I've got the advantage of the star that I'm with my beloved, So then he says, you know, I want this to last forever, to live forever exactly as I am now. This is a really beautiful physical experience for me. Or else swoon to death. This is the version that comes up again and again of, this is a great time to die. DJ, that's basically what he's saying. It's perfect for him. He's got his head resting on his beloved's breasts. Now's the time to die. Can't get any better than this. And I've got to kind of love him for that, because it's all, I mean, it's not subtle, it's not nuanced. It's like, yeah, I really love this woman, and now's a great time to die if I've got to die. But of course, what's poignant is, he knows he's dying. So he's thinking, God, this would be a great time to die because I know what I'm facing. I've had relatives die of tuberculosis. I know what it's like. It's not going to be pleasant. So he goes, this is going to be better. Why don't I just simply swoon, as in die of a stroke, rather than linger as he did in Rome and die with no lung function left.
So he got rejected.
He got rejected? Oh no.
Oh, but
What makes you think he gets rejected?
because he wants to die.
Oh no. He doesn't get rejected. He thinks it's a great time to die, to be in this great physical situation. His life is never going to get better than this.
Okay.
A peak experience to him is this situation where his head's resting on his beloved's breasts. That's the time to go.
Okay.
I would also point out that, interestingly, the French referred to orgasm as a little death. And I often wonder if the French view is, it never gets better than having an orgasm, so now's the time to die. I don't quite think that's true. I don't agree with that, but I also don't think that's necessarily true with the French dying idea. But, okay.
He might be looking for, like, afterlife, or
Oh, an afterlife with her. Totally.
yeah.
Yes. That's actually an interesting question, because he just talks about dying. He says at one point in Ode to Nightingale, I have been half in love with easeful death. And he doesn't talk about what's going to happen after he's died, but I would assume that he hopes that he'll be with his beloved. And I mean, I would have loved it actually if we knew more about Fanny Braun and the relationship that he had. But from his point of view, for all we know, it seems to have been one with deep affection. And not the kind of nasty Coleridge stuff, married to one woman, fooling around with another, which quite rightly the reading class was sort of like, oh, I don't think so. Let's look at next week. So next week we've got 2 classes on American Transcendentalism. Well, let's do Emerson's Nature first. So Monday let's do Nature, and then Wednesday we'll do Preface to House of Seven Gables and Walden. And I've got those links on the syllabus, so you can easily go and take a look at them. Anything else for the good of the cause? Anybody anxious about the class as it is winding down towards its close?
Professor, I might be having a questions from the critical theory class.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about the scientist called the initial is N, like Naifisto. He created a box
Okay.
to decrease the entropy.
Can you email me about
Oh
this?
yeah.
Yeah, email me
Section
about
on
it.
Maxwell's theme.
Okay. Oh, Maxwell's demon. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Email me the question so I can remember. I have to figure it out. Yeah, Maxwell's demon's interesting. No wonder you were talking about it. That makes sense.
Yeah. Jared explained that one to me.
Yeah. So is there any subject that doesn't interest you, Jared? Else you probably know. Accounting. Are you interested in accounting?
My mom used to be an accountant.
Okay, so everybody's in the family.
Generally speaking, no.
Yeah.
There's some that are definitely less interesting.
Yeah.
Or get boring with strict
Yeah. Most students don't have as good a memory as you. Most students don't have as much of an interest in knowledge as you. Why you